miss your old familiar friends, but waiting just around the bend. Everywhere you look, there's a heart, there's a heart.
Ryota Murata versus Rob Brant 2. Let's talk about the fight. Look, we're real big on accountability here on the channel. We like transparency, we like truth, and we like to be held accountable for what we say here on the relay. So let me be the first to say that this was one prediction that I got wrong. Really wrong. I didn't give Ryota Murata much of a chance to win the rematch. Having seen how he performed in the first fight, the fact that in many ways, as a professional, he's still on the green side.
An experience.
I just didn't figure that this guy could make the necessary adjustments to contend with the volume, punching, speed, and accuracy of Rob Brant. I didn't figure that he could get it all together in one camp, going from the first fight right into the rematch. In the spirit of full transparency, I can wholeheartedly say that when it comes to these two particular fighters in this particular matchup, I haven't had any success forecasting the outcome in either of their two fights. In the first fight, I picked Murata to win, and Rob Brant ended up upsetting him. In turn, we look at the rematch, and I pick Rob Brant to win the rematch, and what happens? Murata upsets Rob Brant. So needless to say, this is one of those fights where, you know what? I just couldn't get it right. And I gather it's because neither of these guys, at this particular point in the juncture, is a bankable fighter. Neither Rob Brant or Ryota Murata are yet bankable fighters. They may have one or two bankable qualities, but they're not bankable enough yet that you can trust either one of them to seal the deal. You know, Ryota Murata, he comes from an Olympic background, great amateur pedigree, Olympic gold medalist, but as a professional,
he's green.
He is still on the green side. This guy, he's still got a lot of things that he needs to work on. We then look over at Rob Brant, and Rob Brant, he appears to have a bit more professional experience than Ryota Murata, but Rob Brant, his claim to fame was beating Ryota Murata very recently.
That's it.
If you go back and you look at what he had done up until that point,
not much.
The most noteworthy situation he was in was losing to Jürgen Brammer in the World Boxing Super Series' first season. That aside, he had not established himself as an elite level fighter.
Not yet.
In the middleweight division, and even less in the super middleweight division, where Jürgen Brammer beat him. He returns to the middleweight division. He has this fight with Ryota Murata, and you know what? He put on a sensational performance. I mean, Rob Brant's performance in the first fight really was something. But we now look at the rematch, and Ryota Murata has stolen his thunder. The question is why? How'd he do it? What did Ryota Murata do differently in the second fight that he didn't do in the first fight? Let's talk about it. The opening bell rings, both guys go out there, and Rob Brant appears to be starting off the rematch in similar fashion to what he put on display in the first fight. He goes out there, he's bouncy, using his athleticism, and starts off by throwing combinations, looking to outwork Murata, similar to how he outworked him in the first fight. But what Murata did differently in the rematch that he didn't do in the first fight is, instead of trying to fight the fight from the outside, he decided to put his foot on the gas and apply pressure in the sequel, in the rematch. You'll notice very early in the first round that Ryota Murata was coming forward on Rob Brant and catching him between the punches, between Rob Brant's combinations, hitting him with shots that he didn't see in the heat of the exchange. The best way to characterize it is that he was using Rob Brant's aggression against him because he knows that Rob Brant is going to open up quite a bit, looking to land combinations and outwork him, and that afforded him the opportunity to nail Brant between the punches with really hard shots. A lot of people might have forgot, or maybe they just weren't aware, but Ryota Murata has a lot of power on his side. I mean, this is a guy that has a very strong right hand. That may have been erased from people's memories given what took place in the first fight, but better still, it had its role to play here in the rematch, as Ryota Murata landed quite a few power shots in the very first round between the punches. Another adjustment I saw from Ryota Murata is he wasn't headhunting, okay? He seemed to have been making a conscientious effort to mix up the punches, upstairs and downstairs. He wasn't just trying to knock this guy's block off, he was also trying to take the wind out of Rob Brant, who's a very busy bee if you let him be a very busy bee. And that is yet another adjustment that I think played a major role in Murata's success here in the rematch. The fact that he was mixing up his punches in this fight, whereas, usually he is a bit of a headhunter. And being a headhunter, constantly, firing shots upstairs, it makes you predictable, and it allows the other guy to brace himself for your shots because he can see them coming. Whereas if you mix up the punches going upstairs and downstairs, a varying attack, that gives you an element of surprise.
Not predictable.
Something is going to get through because the other guy doesn't always know where you're gonna hit him. And you know what they say about the punches you don't brace yourself for? The punches you don't see. Those are the ones that hurt the most. And I think that in Ryota Murata, mixing up his attack, going upstairs and downstairs, landing those hard shots, that made a world of difference in this fight. Second round rolls around, Ryota Murata lands a big right hand that immediately, almost immediately, you could tell, it spelled the end for Rob Brant. From that moment on, Ryota Murata just tees off on the guy, knocks him right on his fucking ass. And that's the difference that having a varying attack that goes from the head to the body affords a fighter. It gives that fighter the opportunity to land that signature punch that can greatly affect the outcome of a contest. That whether it's because you've got a varying attack that goes from the head to the body, or it's because you disguise your punches and set traps. The goal is the same, to hit the other guy with shots that he doesn't see, because those are the shots that have the biggest effect. And I think that's what made a world of difference for Ryota Murata in this fight. He wasn't as robotic, he wasn't as predictable, he was more aggressive, showed more moxie and more gusto. He stayed with Rob Brant in close quarters throughout the duration of this fight, even though it didn't last very long. For as long as it lasted, Ryota Murata was right there with Rob Brant, applying the pressure. And I think Rob Brant, maybe he could have hung in there for a couple more rounds. I saw him hurt in the second. And I thought to myself, and Tim Bradley, Andre Ward, they commented on it as well, that Rob Brant, he didn't tie the guy up, and that would have been the logical thing to do. That if you can't handle what this guy's throwing at you, you dive into a clinch. Give yourself time to recuperate, whereas what Rob Brant chose to do was get in that high guard and just absorb those shots, and some of those shots were getting through, downstairs and upstairs. That costed him greatly. He got knocked down, got back up, tried to hang in there, ended up taking more punishment. And the referee, he had no choice but to wave this thing off. It was a sensational fight for as long as it lasted, though it didn't last very long. And I'll tell you, these kinds of unpredictable outcomes, when it's not a foregone conclusion, when it doesn't go the way that you thought it would, it adds that much more excitement to the sport. So while I might have gotten it wrong, I'm not the least bit upset about it, because it was a fantastic fight. And just like that, Ryota Murata is back in the mix of everything. With this victory, avenging this loss. This is the second time that Ryota Murata has avenged a professional loss. The first was that controversial decision that somehow went to Hassan Endam. Well, Ryota Murata, he wasn't fucking having it in the rematch, and it appears that ideology rings true
here today
with Rob Brant, because Ryota just wasn't fucking having it, not this fucking time. Just like that, he's back in the mix of everything, and that's saying a lot, because this guy is huge where he's from. You understand? I know that many people stateside don't keep up with the world scene. They don't realize that Ryota Murata is a guy who had 30 million of his own countrymen tune in just to watch him fight Emmanuel Blandamura, okay? This guy's got a fucking following, and with a victory like this, a sensational performance like this, that following can only be amplified. And let me tell you something. With the kind of following that Ryota Murata has in his own backyard, because he has a massive following, I don't think a lot of people realize just how big this guy is in his own country, with his own countrymen. With the following that this guy has, the fact that he does have ties to DAZN, he does have ties to that platform, yet another tidbit that most people aren't aware of, because here stateside, people saw the fight on ESPN+, whereas elsewhere in the world, it was shown on DAZN. Better still, with these factors in mind, you have to wonder if Gennady Golovkin won't reshift his focus and once again set his sights on Ryota Murata. Not that long ago, that was a conversation, that was a potential opponent option for Gennady Golovkin before Rob Brant upset the plans for Murata in the first fight. But here, having seen the rematch and what the outcome has turned out to be, you have to wonder if the environment isn't right for that fight. Golovkin versus Murata. And it's just a passing thought because we know that that was once a conversation, and we know what kind of fights Gennady Golovkin is looking to participate in. There's a reason that he's prioritizing a Canelo Alvarez rubber match, even though he himself feels that he was robbed in the first two fights. Well, if you were robbed in the first two fights, then why are you looking to fight that guy again? I'll tell you why. The fucking payday. Okay? And if by some chance you can't get Canelo Alvarez in the ring a third time, a Murata fight, that might turn out to get you a big payday. That might get you massive viewership and big numbers, all that jazz. We know that was once the conversation. Could that become the conversation again? I dare say that yes. That is entirely possible. So, for now, passing thoughts aside, congratulations to Ryota Murata for what was just a fucking fantastic, sensational rematch with Rob Brant. If you're gonna win the rematch, if you mean to avenge it, that's the way to do it. Moving on. News broke earlier today that the fight, the mandated WBO light heavyweight title fight between Sergey Kovalev, the champion, and Anthony Yarde, the challenger, it appears that terms have been agreed to, terms have been reached, and the fight is official. Set to be going down on August 24th in Chelyabinsk, Russia. Okay, so let's put it this way, folks. This is a fight that has faced more adversity to make than you would have expected, because this really isn't a mega fight, you understand? This isn't Crawford versus Spence or Joshua versus Wilder or anything of the sort. This is your run-of-the-mill title defense, but for some reason, for one reason or another, this is a fight that has faced numerous difficulties. Difficulties that have resulted in the fight, being postponed, and purse bids are ordered, and purse bids are canceled, and terms are agreed to, and terms are not agreed to. I mean, you really would have thought that this was a mega fight, as hard as it has been to make this thing a reality. But at least right now, the reports are saying that the fight is official. I had my reservations as far as the proposition that the fight would take place in Russia, in Sergey Kovalev's backyard. And that's mostly because Team Yarde expressed aversion to that. They expressed aversion, I should say, in regards to fighting in America. And they cited the scoring for the Fury versus Wilder fight as the reason that they don't want to have to come here because they see how people here are scoring fights. They called themselves the A-side, whole bunch of stuff. I'll leave the link to that video in the description box, but these are things that Team Yarde had said. So the idea that they would actually board a plane, fly out to Russia, to Sergey Kovalev's backyard, for a world title opportunity similar to the world title opportunities that they already turned down in the past. The idea that they would actually go through with it, knowing that Anthony Yarde is a very green fighter, untested on the world stage. He doesn't come from an extensive amateur background like some others. The fact that this is a fight that Anthony Yarde seems largely unprepared for, that isn't really even necessary, that they can walk away from. The idea that they would go through with this seemed like a hard pill to swallow for me. It was one of those situations where I was thinking, I'm going to have to see it to believe it, because right now, I'm not believing it. And that skepticism was fueled by how difficult this fight has been to orchestrate. It does appear that at least one of the scenarios I presented in one of my previous videos regarding this fight, it does appear that at least one of those scenarios was spot on. That one of the issues that was holding up this fight was, in fact, the funding. That maybe the way we can explain why this fight has been so difficult to orchestrate is because there's an issue with the funding. Who is flipping the bill to orchestrate this fight? You understand? I hypothesized that maybe that's what's going on, because we've seen this in the case of
Sharipova.
Firuza Sharipova, and what was supposed to be a title fight between her and Eva Wallstrom, that the fight fell apart because the funding fell apart, so the fight never actually came off. And I hypothesized that maybe that's what's going on, and maybe that's what's holding up the fight. And the article states that that's at least one of the reasons this thing has been so elusive. Now, With this fight being confirmed, you know, the date, the venue, everything, where it's going to take place, all that jazz. With this news, we now know that, okay, Sergey Kovalev is out of the running for that Canelo Alvarez fight this fall. He's not going to be fighting that guy. He's spoken for because he's going to be fighting in August. So that begs the question as to who exactly is Canelo Alvarez supposed to be facing in September? Who is this guy going to fight? Because the pool of names
that are available to him,
that is, who DAZN has approved for him to fight, it's a short list. You know, it's a short list. The names on that list were either Sergey Kovalev, Gennady Golovkin, or Jaime Munguia. So, you know, out of those three names, you got to figure that what's going to happen. Are we going to see a rubber match in September between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin since Sergey Kovalev is out of the running? Or will Canelo choose to fight his own countryman, Jaime Munguia, even though fighting his own countryman is something that Canelo Alvarez said he is averse to? We really don't know. But I will tell you the truth, that I'm not excited at the proposition of a rematch with Gennady Golovkin, and I've said that many times, because I think we've seen what we're going to see from the first two fights, you understand? I'm not intrigued by the rubber match. I would certainly watch it if that's what happens, but it's not something that I'm excited about. I'd actually be more excited to see Canelo Alvarez and his team incentivize an offer for Callum Smith, because that is a fight that could see Canelo Alvarez becoming a full-fledged champion in 3 weight classes. We're not talking about a baby belt. We're not talking about that trinket that he won from Rocky Fielding, okay? Callum Smith is the Ring Magazine and WBA champion in the super middleweight division. He is the consensus #1 guy at the weight. Whether you look on BoxRec, ESPN, Transnational, or Ring Magazine, you're going to find the same name in the #1 spot, and that is the name of Callum Smith. In that way, he's just as credible an opponent as Sergey Kovalev would have been. And it's a more intriguing situation than a Golovkin rubber match because we've been there and done that. We've seen what that fight has to offer. It's got entertainment, but it's a rerun. And I certainly don't want to see Canelo Alvarez fighting some kid who's on the green side from 154 at 160. That also does not interest me. That does not intrigue me. But the thought of Canelo Alvarez squaring off against a statuesque and sizable puncher like Callum Smith, that genuinely intrigues me. So, you know, with this news, that at least for now, Sergey is out of the running, it is unknown who Canelo Alvarez is going to decide to fight. We don't know. He hasn't seemed too crazy about having a rubber match with Gennady Golovkin, so it's questionable. But if I had to make a suggestion, if I had it my way, the next fight I'd like to see Canelo win is a fight with Callum Smith.